The partnership of Charles McKim, William Rutherford Mead, and Stanford White was established in 1879 and went from being a small atelier of 12 young architects to become the largest and most famous architecture firm in the world. The exceptional abilities of these three were evident from their very first commission, the Newport Casino, which you see here in an archival photograph. The casino and buildings of this period explored an original idiom of American architecture, a kind of picturesque collage of, or synthesis of English Queen Anne, French medieval, and American colonial elements that the architects referred to as the modern colonial, but which Vincent Scully has irrevocably christened the shingle style. Well, the casino transformed the architecture of the Atlantic seaboard. It's really remarkable. From this celebrated beginning, the firm went on to, at least the three original partners went on to execute almost 1,000 commissions. They worked on America's most sacred sites, including the Mall and the White House in Washington, D.C. They rebuilt Thomas Jefferson's Rotunda at the University of Virginia. They worked for America's richest and most powerful families, including Frederick Vanderbilt, for whom they created this villa overlooking the Hudson, and Pierpont Morgan, for whom they created this small library in the style of the High Italian Renaissance in 1906. Well, any review of even their most important works has to overcome, particularly in a restricted period of time, has to overcome twin obstacles. One is just the sheer size of their portfolio. But the second is this fault line that appears to divide their earliest works from their latest. And this morning, what I would like to say is that if you look below the surface of what you see, you will discover sort of a consistent ethos, a consistent set of values that in fact, starts to suggest that the architectural distance between the Newport Casino and the Pierpont Morgan Library is not as great as it at first appears. These buildings do reflect this kind of core set of values of the firm, which I call the classical ideal of McKim, Mead, and White. Now, this is a set of values or a paradigm that is unrelated to the classical style or to any style for that matter, and it's just as valid today as it was 130 years ago. And it informs their work from the very beginning. And of these values, the first and most important was urbanism. I believe that the three partners considered the city to be the greatest achievement of civilization, and that the public street was the city's most sacred precinct. Any structure that addressed the street, in doing that, incurred an obligation to the public that could only be discharged by the highest levels of design. So that my sense is that at McKim, Mead, and White, the first commandment was honor the street. And it sort of defines their work from the very beginning. The street that is honored by the Newport Casino is Bellevue Avenue. I don't know if you've been up to Newport, but 20 years after the casino was built, Bellevue Avenue became this wonderful sort of processional route of great marble palaces. But Newport was a pretty simple town when they built this. And they honor the street with a quite formal composition that has as a program decision retail storefronts at the ground floor. So it animates the street and the sidewalk at a pedestrian scale, and then through architectural massing and decorative detail proceeds to honor the street with this really delicious but very deliberately formed facade, which not only honors the street, but it kind of serves as a foil for what you see inside the casino when you go through that portal, that you see this sort of highly picturesque asymmetrical composition, so that the two work together in juxtaposition, I think, very effectively. The second commandment, as it were, was collaborate. And Charles McKim and William Mead had both been classically educated. McKim had gone to the Beaux-Arts, Mead had gone to the Academia in Florence, and Stanford White had not gone to college, but had learned architecture as an apprentice to Henry Hobson Richardson, who had gone to the Beaux-Arts. And the Beaux-Arts training for architects was teaching architects to be leaders of a team of artists and craftsmen working in collaboration on projects. And so this was embedded into the culture of McKim, Mead, and White. The first opportunity they had to collaborate was, in this sense, was a small church up in Massachusetts in Stockbridge, this sort of granitic, rather dour church. It has a wonderful sort of urban relationship to the street around it. But inside, it is a very sort of gentle collaboration of mostly craftsmen, woodworkers, ironworkers, stained glass window builders, and carvers of those angels. And then it has back there, it has a quite specific collaboration where Stanford White worked with Louis St. Gaudens, the brother of Augustus, and with Louis Comfort Tiffany, the stained glass window man with whom White had collaborated a year earlier at the 7th Regiment Armory to create this wonderful sort of early Renaissance tableau for the baptismal font. The third commandment here, the third of these elements of the classical ideal, is know your history. And because if you don't know your history, you're really going to look stupid. McKim was a historian, sort of to his core. He studied history, he loved history. Early in his career, he independently commissioned a photographic survey of what he considered to be the disappearing stock of late 18th, early 19th century architecture and decorative arts in Newport. And this is the Sabbatarians' Meeting House. This book of photographs, there's still a couple of copies around. There's one at the Newport Historical Society. This was kind of a Bible on one side of the draftsman's desk at McKim, Mead, and White, in which they had resources to look at just how these sort of wonderful details and proportions of historic interiors were made, and that informed their work really from the beginning to end. This is the King House on Berkeley Street in Newport, just a highly literate essay in this kind of Georgian paneling. And then this is a house out in Montauk Point. Their sort of sense of history and love of particularly American history sort of took them back to on walking tours up through New England and inspired them to sort of recreate these elements such as that sort of 25-pane window, which really spoke to a time when you couldn't get a piece of glass bigger than that. But interestingly, while they were among the first architects to appreciate American history, they also appreciated European history. This is a farmhouse in Normandy. And you look at those shingle details and the dormer details, and you realize suddenly that what you thought was a kind of an American idiom, in fact, was imported. And it was imported because Stanford White had spent 14 months on a sabbatical after he was through with Richardson, before he went into partnership with McKim, Mead, and White, filling dozens of sketchbooks with drawings such as this, of these sort of details of medieval farmhouses and sort of vernacular buildings throughout northern Europe. And they get these details in these sketchbooks sort of reappear almost immediately in the work of the firm. This is the Samuel Tilton House in Newport, a very early, I think it's 1881, very early work of the firm. It's missing, just so you know, there should be a front porch there. That front porch is missing, but it shows the sort of combination of White's interest in highly picturesque medieval elements with McKim's interest in a kind of a coherent massing. And then it includes this sort of wonderful, in this case, this is a collaboration where the firm just is collaborating with itself. I am convinced that Stanford White got up on a scaffold and with some broken beer bottles and some beach pebbles and created this wonderful sort of painting on wet stucco. I mean, it has so much authority that this was not something that would have been done by one of the casual workmen on the place. It's just an amazing house. But look at the half timbering and other elements that sort of relate to White's trip to Europe. Their interest in history had a more formal basis as well. And this is the book that they went to more than any other. This is The History of Modern Rome. I'll spare you my French accent, written by Paul Latarroui, I think around 1860, published in Paris. And Latarroui made, it's a tour de force, this kind of virtuoso recording of of Italian Renaissance buildings in Rome. While the McKim's survey of Newport would have been on one side of a draftsman's desk, this would have been on the other. And their first opportunity to quote from this book came with this, again, early commission from about 1882. At this point, the firm had been in business for 3 years, and their ship really came in when Henry Byard bought an entire block front on Madison Avenue and hired them to design 6 townhouses, which they presented as a Renaissance palazzo. The front door to one is there. There are 2 front doors there. Front door to a 4th is there, a 5th is around the back, and a 6th is down the street. But this is a sort of a brilliant urban solution to presenting what would otherwise be just 6 more townhouses in New York, which was already a sea of townhouses. People say that Stanford White was responsible for the general planning of this, but everyone agrees that Joseph Morrill Wells, who was an employee at McKim, Mead White, was responsible for convincing his bosses to abandon their Richardsonian aesthetic in favor of the Renaissance. And Wells had been to Rome. He had actually sketched the Cancelleria in Rome, and he used that as the inspiration for his details. With, at this point, reference available that's from Latarroui there, and these are the orders in the Byard houses. Wells really, it was a brilliant example of kind of managing up. Wells redirected the interests of the partners. But in the meantime, Stanford White was at work on the interior of this building, leading a team of the finest artists and craftsmen sort of aided by the apparently bottomless resources of Henry Byard to create some of the most beautiful interiors in America. Those are really delicious. McKim really bought Latarroui. He thought that there was a lot to be learned here that you were never going to learn from Salem or Newburyport or Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And so, for example, this sketch that is from Latarroui shows the courtyard at the Palazzo della Cancelleria, and you can see the sort of the order, the plain unfluted column with that capital is probably a Doric order with this sort of decorated little capital. Then the way of turning the corner. You know, the great problem in the Renaissance was how you turned a corner in an arcade, and here's how it was done at the Cancelleria. Anyway, he took this and he picked it right up and used it as the courtyard at the Boston Public Library, his great commission that came in the late 1880s. It's all there, and it's all straight out of Latarroui, but it's this sort of magic moment when you get to the Boston Public Library that is completely unexpected, sort of space in the center that is filled with light. The Boston Public Library certainly follows the other elements of the classical ideal that I've been talking about, this collaboration. Those murals are by Puvis de Chavannes, who was at this point an aging French academician who sort of 15 or 18 years earlier, when McKim had been at the Beaux-Arts, McKim was really taken by. And he was, Puvis was kind of on his last legs, I think, when he did these. But it was important to McKim to bring him in. Those lions are carved by Louis St. Gaudens, the brother of Augustus. Then the street, I mean, this building just doesn't honor the street. This building actually is the kind of the cop in the neighborhood. This is on Copley Square, which is and continues to be this sort of hodgepodge urbanistically, but to the extent that order has been imposed in Copley Square, it is by the Boston Public Library. You look at this and you start to think, well, this is classical architecture, and therefore it's related to the past. And that's actually not true. You have to place yourself in 1889 in McKim's shoes. This was an incredibly modern building. And that is the next element of the classical ideal, which is this commitment to the modern. That It was a modern institution. I mean, there was nowhere else in the world, really, where a citizen could walk into a building, go up to a desk, and ask for a book, and sit down and read it. So this was the absolute cutting edge of sort of institutional design. And then if you want to think about what the architecture is like, all you have to do is compare it to I think that's the Old North Church in the background there, or Old South, I never can get them straight, but that church is only 10 years older than the Boston Public Library. I mean, just this is why McKim's idiom displayed his absolute commitment to the modern era. It also shows you another aspect of the classical ideal, which is procession. That there is this sort of sense of movement to this building, and you see the front door very clearly, those 3 dark arches in the center, and you start to walk to it, and you go up these incredibly gentle steps, and you turn right, and then you turn left, and there's no architect in the world was ever as good at staircases as Charles McKim. I mean, they are so inviting that gravity practically carries you upstairs here. And that is what was important to their work. You cannot understand the work of McKim, Mead, and White without understanding how you move towards it, around it, and through it. That procession was a way not only of revealing the architectural intentions, but it was a way of experiencing the architecture. That the movement through that building was absolutely important. It made you feel good. It did not make you feel bad. The kind of most literal example of processional architecture would be the Washington Memorial Arch down in Washington Square, which was built originally in papier-mâché as a kind of a terminus for the parade that celebrated the centennial of Washington's inauguration. But it was so popular that they rebuilt it about 100 feet to the south and had it done in marble. And for years and years, the great parades in New York were all sort of civic parades. I mean, they weren't cultural and they weren't ethnic as they are now. They were all sort of had to do with sort of great moments in American history. And this was, the Washington Arch was marked either the beginning or the end point in these parades. And so this sort of commitment to processional architecture had a kind of a civic and urban scale as well. But you saw it in all of their work. This is the Metropolitan Club in New York City. And originally, when it was built, members of the Metropolitan Club used to arrive by carriage, and those gates would swing open, and the carriage would go in and would turn around and it would drop them off. And so there was this sort of experience of this club had this processional quality, but remember, this is honoring the street. This is a private club that is making this incredible gift back to the city of these great gates. And now, members of the Metropolitan Club, unfortunately, do not go there by carriage anymore. But the gift is still there. I mean, this is still this building that honors its place on the public street because it's kind of taking up space in the public street. It's really paying its rent every time you walk past it. Now, members of the Metropolitan Club are not denied their processional experience, I would have to say. They walk in the front door, and this is what they go through. Procession is still important. But the other thing that's important is yet another aspect of the classical ideal, which is spirit. That McKim, Mead, and White believed that a building had to reflect, both in terms of its internal design and its exterior appearance, the spirit of the program, the spirit of the commission. I mean, these buildings looked like they had some real life to them. So that the Century Association, which is down on 43rd Street, my sense about that is that the spirit that it's projecting is the spirit of Florence in the 15th century, that there is get this club that's a collection of artists and writers and poets, and that the kind of energy generated by having that many creative people inside the building is kind of pushing its way through the walls and manifesting itself on the exterior elevations. And they were not just limited to kind of high-style spirit. They would go for spirit sort of in any event. This is a roof garden, outdoor restaurant, theater at Madison Square Garden, where the architecture, and particularly these elements up at the roof of the rondelles or whatever these things were, just with this wonderful kind of star of Roman candles above, all expressing just the pure pleasure of going out for an evening's worth of entertainment. And the whole building, in fact, expressed this. There were about 8 different program elements in this building that were all dedicated to pleasure, and this building just sort of radiated that sort of generosity and excitement from the moment you saw it. The spirit that this building reflects is I would say, the spirit of democracy. This is the State House in Providence, Rhode Island, and McKim, Mead, and White won this as a competition. And what's extremely interesting is that McKim, Mead, and White were the first architects to make a connection between the national capital in Washington, D.C. and the seat of state government. That if you look at Capitol buildings built in America before 1893, when this competition was won, none of them make a connection to the Capitol. And McKim, Mead, and White realized that it was important to the concept of sovereignty of state government that it have some connection to the concept of the national union. And this building also reflects, I think, the last of my list of elements of the classical ideal, which is beauty, which is to say that the beauty which is now, in the world of contemporary art, beauty is kind of a dirty word. But it wasn't for them, and they made everything they did, every material they chose, every line they drew, was really directed towards making what they were doing as beautiful as possible. Well, by 1893, they had been in practice long enough so that the aspects of this classical ideal were in place, and they were now starting to work at a national scale, in which their first opportunity came at the Chicago Centennial Exposition, just a remarkable event in that 25 million people saw it, which was, in 1893, was pretty amazing. It has been criticized. I mean, Louis Sullivan said that this was the thing that set American architecture back 100 years. But look underneath that. There were some opportunities to express what I think are these perfectly valid paradigms, including collaboration. I mean, I just love this shot. This is a sort of a team photo of the artists and architects who were working on the fair. And there is Richard Morris Hunt, the Dean of American Architecture. There is Augustus St. Gaudens, who was the head of the Sculpture Committee. And this one is really great. This is Daniel Burnham, who was in fact, Hunt was just nominally the head of this. Daniel Burnham was really in charge, and it was Daniel Burnham's responsibility to keep order on this team of independent mind artists. And he's sort of looking like this sort of tough Irish cop, and he's looking over his shoulder at Charles McKim back there, who's trying to hide in the back, looking as if butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. It was said of Charles McKim in his relationship with the other members of this committee that Charles McKim always got his way. So Burnham was right to be concerned about him. Well, the work that they did after that does sort of recapitulate what I have just been describing. I mean, this is Columbia University. The building that Low Library, the street that Low Library honors was 116th Street, which used to, when this was built, 116th Street ran right through the center of the campus. And here is a building that truly honors the street. Their sense of American history is sort of captured in the Percy Pine House at 68th Street and Park Avenue. I think that the firm was really responsible for the Federal Revival. These are buildings that they had seen, the Samuel McIntyre buildings they'd seen in Newburyport or Salem or in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and they realized that this was an appropriate aesthetic for the plutocrats in New York who wanted to live comfortably but did not want to flaunt their wealth with marble buildings in sort of fancy European styles. So that this neo-federal aesthetic, which is just beautiful and is so restrained and so elegant, was really brought out by McKim, Mead, and White. But their interest in the ancient architecture of Greece and Rome is seen in Stanford White's design for the library at NYU. I mean, here he's kind of using Greece and Rome as sort of scenographic elements superimposed on each other, and taking a building that, you know, if you look at that building, that's the Pantheon. But while McKim might have been interested in the formal, massive aspects of the Pantheon, Stanford White is really interested in the Pantheon as a decorative surface, and he animates it as such. They were interested, they were still committed to the modern. This is a style that we look at it and you think, well, Bob Stern. But this is something that McKim, Mead, and White invented. They took the shingle style and they sort of synthesized it with their interest in Greece and Rome. So suddenly, instead of the sort of skinny columns and sort of knife-edged porch eaves and sort of tightly wrapped but still highly patterned shingle surfaces of the truly early shingle style work, you now have this style, which I would call the colonial revival, where the patterned shingles have become plain, the picturesque asymmetrical roof lines have become regularized, but they're just as picturesque, and then the trim has gone over to this sort of Vitruvian palette with sort of some really hefty proportions. They invented that style, and it's still valid today as a way of sort of celebrating the relationship between the built and natural environment on the eastern seaboard. And they were committed more than ever to movement. This is Penn Station, and people talk about Penn Station at a lot of levels, but Penn Station was this really sort of was a processional diagram. You had to, McKim's problem was that you started at 7th Avenue, you ended up at 8th, actually between 8th and 9th Avenue by the time you got on the train, so you had to go sort of 1.5 very long blocks, and you had to go from an elevation change of about 30 feet from where you got into the building at 7th Avenue to where you got into the train. And what he's doing is he's celebrating that process with this great processional series of spaces, of which the waiting room is based on this. This is a German archaeologist's recreation of the tepidarium at the Baths of Caracalla. So McKim certainly knew his history, but he was celebrating movement because this space led into the concourse there, which is where you actually got into trains. And here is what's essential about Penn Station is to understand both that it is this processional event, and then it reflects this sort of commitment not only to history but to the modern. This space was the latest that technology could produce. This is like the Frank Gehry interior of its time, and it was important to have that juxtaposition of the past and the future in the same building. The sort of commitment to the modern was there. They were committed to expressing the spirit of their programs. This is a guest house that they designed for John Jacob Astor IV up at Rhinebeck, New York. Some of you may know it as the place where Chelsea Clinton got married. But what I think is really funny is that what they used as their model was the building that Louis XIV had designed for the entertainment of his mistresses at Versailles, the Grand Trianon. But it's a building in which the spirit, sort of this wonderful spirit of recreation sort of really pervades every aspect of the interior. This is the swimming pool, which is this is, I think, the first indoor swimming pool in America. Either this or Biltmore. I'm not sure which one came first. But here, they're using the most minimal vocabulary to celebrate. Just light, two colors. I mean, blue and white, light, and then essentially sort of two materials. I mean, marble, stucco, and water. So I guess there are three materials. But it kind of doesn't get simpler or more beautiful than this. The combination of these aspects of the sort of classical ideals sort of are behind this building. This is the University Club, and what you think of in terms of spirit is the spirit of the Medici when you look at it. In fact, there's a wonderful story about Le Corbusier that he came to America in the late 20s, and he traveled around, and he then would later write that, he said that it was not until he came to New York that he finally understood the power of Italian Renaissance architecture. This is what he must have been looking at, that this is a building which speaks of pure power. But it also starts to speak of McKim's sense that these things needed to be combined in what the Germans call a Gesamtkunstwerk, a complete work of art. I mean, something that is so beautiful and so perfect that nothing could be added and nothing could be taken away. And I think that if you look at the library at the University Club, you will begin to understand what McKim was after. I mean, here is a space of almost kind of thermonuclear beauty and perfection. It just seems to radiate electricity. And it's a collaboration, you know, they're muralists working on this thing. There are woodworkers, there are sculptors there. I mean, even the writers, in a sense, were collaborators because the books are so important to that interior. But if you ever get a chance to see the library at the University Club, I recommend it strongly. Well, McKim loved it so much that he took Pierpont Morgan up on a scaffold in the middle of summer to take a look at this thing as it was coming together. And it was, from a marketing standpoint, a good move because Pierpont Morgan called him up and asked him to do this library, which Morgan was willing to spend an astonishing amount of money in that period. I think it started around 1903, 1902, was finished around 1906. And here is a building that represents or reflects every aspect of the classical ideal that we have been talking about. I mean, honoring the street for the first thing. I mean, this is a private library. This was there very, very few people got to walk in that front door, but nonetheless, nobody was the poorer for it because you get to see this quite remarkable facade that then faces this sort of carpet-like strip of lawn. I mean, this in New York City, that must have been so rare. And then with this fence, which has the most sort of delicious little detail. I mean, this is there isn't a piece of ironwork. In fact, this is bronze, but there's not a piece of metalwork like this in a public place in New York City. And this was all for the public. This was what Morgan was doing for the street. And if you were one of the few people lucky enough to be able to walk in the front door, you were not disappointed. I mean, it even got better. This is McKim's sort of take on the Villa Madama in Rome, and using, again, sort of the Morgan's. Villard thought he had bottomless resources, but Morgan really did have bottomless resources, and the level of material and detail in this space building is just amazing. I mean, those are the bookcases with those sort of slightly pulvinated pilasters that have been then inlaid in marquetry with a lighter wood, and then this wonderful sort of twisted bronze grills that go over them, all framing this space, the East Room, which is held Morgan's collection. This space has been recently cleaned up by the library. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but if you haven't seen it in the past year, I really recommend a return trip. They cleaned it, they relit it, and the change in that is not just a physical change of enhancing the look of the space. It makes you understand for the first time what the source of Morgan's passion was, why he was willing to spend almost anything to get a early medieval book of hours or so, an illuminated manuscript. And it makes you finally understand just how beautiful he thought those things were because of the way they cleaned up this room. An Englishman named Charles H. Riley, I think, must have seen this room because he wrote, in 1924, he wrote one of the few, I think, particularly at that time, appraisals of McKim, Mead, and White. I mean, McKim, Mead, and White went out of popularity very fast, but Riley said that McKim, Mead, and White did for American architecture what Henry James did for American literature, that they reinterpreted the old world for the new in a way that allowed the new to enter for the first time into its full inheritance. Well, Charles McKim realized that the process of reinterpreting the old world for the new was not a one-time transaction, and he spent his life in the establishment and nurturing of the American Academy at Rome, which you see here on this hill, on the Janiculum Hill, in this building designed by the second generation of partners at McKim, Mead, and White. But here, American artists, architects, musicians, painters get an opportunity to sort of immerse themselves in 2,000 years of Western culture. They get opportunities to collaborate with the most talented of their peers, and they get to read the text of urbanism in its original language. And I think that anyone who has ever visited or studied at or seen the American Academy at Rome understands that its exceptional allure arises from, as well as validates, the continued relevance of the classical ideal of McKim, Mead, and White. Thank you very much.